What if I told you that boredom isn't just the absence of activity, but something far more important? A silent weight that can rot the spirit, driving men to chase distraction instead of silence. What if the greatest threat to civilization isn't malice or cruelty, but a humanity so terrified of its own stillness that it flees into noise, conformity, and thoughtless repetition? Picture this. You can't be in a waiting room without seeing your Instagram. Your co-workers are always scrolling to TikTok during lunch. Drivers can't stay in the red light without checking if they got new messages. These are not naive people. They are normal and social creatures who've got lost in the inability of being bored alone. Nietzsche called boredom as the worst enemy, but also the fertile soil. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. It's not happening to other people. It's happening to people just like you and me. This isn't a philosophical speculation. In 2014, Timothy Wilson conducted his famous experience at University of Virginia. Normal people were instructed to sit in a quiet room for 15 minutes with the instruction of doing absolutely nothing. They were given nothing except a button that they knew they would get shocked if they pressed it. 25% of women and 65% of the men shocked themselves. Those weren't people with any psychological problems. They were regular people who could stay silent with their thoughts. This is exactly what Nietzsche witnessed in his life and led him to understand one of the most controversial theories about human nature ever conceived. But before we dive deeper, I have to ask, have you ever felt a deep sense of meaninglessness when you are alone with your thoughts? Keep that question in mind as we explore what might be one of the most important psychological insights of the modern era. Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't the typical philosopher well received by society, writing abstract thoughts. He was a German teacher who watched his entire society throw away one of the biggest gifts in front of their lives. Born in 1844 into a family of pastors, he took up a teaching position at a renowned university at just 24 years of age. Nietzsche had every reason to believe that people could reach at any potential they could be. But after years of understanding society, Nietzsche witnessed something that prevented human potential. He watched several fellow Germans with a high level of education to throw away their potential. They were simple people who lacked education and culture. They were great workers who actively wasted all their resources into the ground. From his writings in 1878, he wrote in one of his biggest works, Human, All Too Human. Against boredom, even the gods struggle in vain. For boredom brings with it the desire for games, for distractions, for change, but it is also the fertile soil of all creative reflection. What made this observation so chilling wasn't just its context, but its precision. Always moving, stimulating ourselves, makes us believe that is good, making it absolutely useful. Perhaps Nietzsche's most prescient insight in this subject was about how stimulation makes us very profitable. People who are very reactive in any way or shape or form tend to be very poor in judgment and ideas that need to be created. This is a problem. It is what allows us to be easily adapted to the current world without bringing any meaning. When Nietzsche used the word bored, he wasn't talking about bored in activities. He was describing something far more complex in modern society, what we might call crazy or nonsense. In his book, The Gay Science, Nietzsche said, "We need boredom and time to think. We need to endure slowness, delay, resistance, everything that goes against the instinct to hurry, so that great ideas can be born." Here's what made Nietzsche's theory so revolutionary. He argued that boredom often emerges not from just constant stimulation, but also from self-pressure about the meaning of life or symptoms of depression. The truth is, when we embrace boredom, we start to ask deep questions like the meaning of life, purpose, or beliefs. And sometimes this is uncomfortable because it makes us realize that we don't have the important answers in life. Also, social media platforms make billions when users react emotionally rather than think critically. With these new outlets, we have FOMO all the time. What is happening in the elections right now? Is this urgent news getting out? Is there anything else on the war in the last 30 minutes? When people are so reactive of everything, we have a big fear of missing out, or as the psychologists call, a compulsive need to stay connected with others and participate in rewarding experiences to avoid feeling left out or inadequate. It becomes more comforting to individuals to remain connected all the time than to clear their minds and let them feel bored. The result isn't just individual choice, It's a psychological spiral of fear and loneliness. While modern systems drive us toward endless stimulation and distraction, our souls are already wired to surrender. Boredom terrifies us, and so we rush to fill it with noise, with half-thoughts, with the easy comforts of conformity. When silence presses against us, we escape into entertainment, consumption, or the dogmas of the crowd, because to remain alone with the void would demand strength. But here lies the cruel paradox. The very conditions of our age, stress, insecurity, the restless chase of survival, are the ones that rob us of the capacity to endure boredom. And when a culture cannot endure boredom, it also cannot endure depth. It flees from truth into distraction, and in doing so, it wastes away. Nietzsche observed that boredom often emerges in group settings, as he wrote on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The patient spirit took upon itself all these things. As the camel, laden, runs into the desert, runs into its most solitary desert. He saw that even sharp, rational minds surrender when the crowd offers them relief from the weight of silence. Nietzsche would say they cannot bear the desert of boredom, and so they trade their own judgment for the comfort of belonging. What Asch's experiments later confirmed is simply this: most people would rather echo the noise of the group than face the loneliness of their own thought. In our digital age, this weakness has become a marketplace. Social media sells escape from boredom in the form of endless distraction, echo chambers where agreement replaces truth. And because we cannot endure the stillness of thought, lies now spread faster than truth, 6 times faster, the researchers say. For Nietzsche, this is not a surprise, but a symptom. A civilization terrified of boredom will always choose illusion over reality, noise over silence, conformity over creation. But here's the crucial insight. It is not only that falsehood feels sweeter than truth, it is that it spares us from the torment of boredom. Complex truths demand silence, endurance, the slow digestion of thought. Lies, on the other hand, are quick, intoxicating, and noisy. When someone spreads misinformation that confirms what they already believe, they are not just embracing error, they are fleeing the desert of stillness Nietzsche spoke of. The algorithm knows this weakness. It feeds the restless spirit exactly what it craves: distraction, affirmation, endless novelty. And so the feed becomes not a mirror of reality, but a carefully engineered escape from the terror of sitting alone with oneself. This is not new. History repeats the same pattern. Cultures unable to endure boredom always collapse into noise, illusions, and self-deception. A study made in 2014 showed that the number of people who got depression and anxiety are stronger in cases of heavy use of social media. This means those people who are constantly running away from boredom are in an illusion of a pursuit, a real fulfillment. If our brains and systems are bent against us, how do we resist? Nietzsche would remind us that the struggle begins not with society, but with ourselves, with our terror of boredom. Nietzsche would call it the courage to remain in the desert when others run to the noise of the herd. To fight back means to endure the stillness where no algorithm can entertain us, no distraction can shield us, and our thoughts reveal their true weight. We are not merely battling social pressure, but our own ancient impulse to flee the void, now weaponized by billion-dollar machines that feed on our restlessness. On the individual level, resistance means learning to bear boredom until it becomes fertile, until the silence turns into creation rather than decay. Psychologists name it intellectual humility, but Nietzsche might name it honesty before the abyss, knowing that our beliefs are provisional and only those that survive solitude deserve to live. This is why the practice matters, to sit with ideas that unsettle us, to invite contradiction not as torture, but as trial by fire. Every moment we resist the urge to drown our boredom in the chorus of the crowd, we sharpen our independence. These daily acts of endurance are not small, they are the only proof that we have not surrendered our sovereignty to distraction. First, practice enduring the desert of boredom. Set aside time each week, not for more noise, but for the still, difficult labor of wrestling with voices that oppose you. Do not seek them to be comforted or converted, but to sharpen your convictions against the grindstone of contradiction. Second, embrace not taking the bait. When you feel you need to jump in an argument or friction, you don't agree, let it go, and go back to your stillness. Third, learn to delay. In the age of noise, the greatest rebellion is a pause. Before you cast your words into the chaos of the crowd, endure 60 seconds of silence, 60 seconds of boredom. In that desert, ask whether what you share springs from truth or from the restless urge to escape stillness. Finally, dare to say, I do not know. In an age that rewards loud illusions over quiet truth, this confession is no weakness but strength, for boredom is what rushes in when certainty dissolves and most cannot endure it. But individual discipline is not enough. The will of one soul cannot withstand an entire culture fleeing from boredom into noise. We also need structures that make honesty possible, systems that do not feed on our restlessness, but force us to endure silence and thought. This would mean tearing away the masks of the algorithms, exposing how they exploit our fear of stillness to keep us chained to distraction. It means shaping digital spaces that reward the courage to dwell in uncertainty, rather than the comfort of tribal noise. Above all, it means creating conditions of life where people are not crushed by survival's constant demand, because only when the spirit is freed from relentless anxiety can it endure the desert of boredom without fleeing. Nietzsche was ahead of his time in a way he would never have imagined. Modern neuroscience reveals something far more unsettling. Our brains are literally wired to fall into dopamine. Think about it. In the old times, people got into alcohol and nights around the bonfire, but we're living through something exponentially more dangerous. We have moved from the blunt weapons of propaganda to the precision of algorithms, and now into an age where machines can conjure entire realities out of nothing. The threat is not only louder, it is deeper, for it strikes at the very marrow of how the human mind flees boredom. Our brains did not evolve for truth, but for survival. To cling to what is familiar, to chase speed over reflection, to grasp at whatever relieves the silence. Nietzsche would warn that this wiring, once exploited by AI illusions, will turn whole cultures into herds drunk on distraction, unable to endure the stillness where thought and freedom are forged. Once, these instincts were weapons of survival, quick decisions when hesitation meant death. But in the modern age, the same impulses betray us. The scariest part, none are immune. Even the cleverest minds collapse when they cannot endure the stillness of uncertainty. This is what Nietzsche saw. When people feel threatened, when life strips them bare, they grasp at any voice that drowns their boredom with certainty. They cling to simple stories, not because they are true, but because they spare them from the desert of silence, where thought must struggle to live. Here lies the insight that sharpens Bonhoeffer's warning for our age. The enemy is no longer merely human manipulation, but machines that prey on our inability to endure boredom. Artificial intelligence now studies every pause, every click, every restless flicker of attention, turning our flight from stillness into a weapon against us. Nietzsche thought wasn't just about psychological resistance, it was about defending the very possibility of human thought. He understood that when people can no longer endure the silence of their own thought, they surrender what makes them human. In fleeing boredom, they also flee freedom. They become mere puppets, pulled not by destiny, but by the noisiest hand of the moment, dancing to any tune that spares them the desert of solitude. What makes Nietzsche's final challenge burn with relevance today is this question: who endures? Who remains standing when the pressure to conform swells like a tide, when independent thought demands courage, when truth costs more than the comfort of lies? The answer does not lie in brilliance or education. It lies in the daily decision to endure the desert of boredom rather than flee into noise, to remain curious when certainty beckons, to wrestle with silence rather than drown in distraction, to think slowly when the herd demands haste. These are not grand acts of heroism. They are small disciplines, made extraordinary only because so few now practice them. The tragedy is that surrender often feels like freedom. To abandon thought is easier than to sustain it. To dissolve into the crowd is lighter than to carry solitude. Thinking is hard, it wounds, it bores. It requires one to hold contradictions without collapse, to admit error without despair. Yet Nietzsche would remind us, this is the price of remaining human. To endure the boredom others flee is to preserve the dignity they abandon. In a world that fattens itself on our flight from boredom, the decision to think for oneself is already an act of rebellion. And here lies the most unsettling truth: none of us are immune. The very moment we believe we have conquered this weakness, we have already surrendered to it. For what we fear is not no noise, but the silence in which true thought must be forged. The price of intellectual freedom is not vigilance against tyrants alone, but against the temptation within, the longing to escape the desert of thought, to trade the slow pain of boredom for the quick comfort of certainty. Nietzsche would say, "Only the one who endures this desert without fleeing remains free. The rest become slaves who call their chains relief." Nietzsche's view of boredom unsettles precisely because it is so piercingly true. We see its signs everywhere: clever men clinging to obvious falsehoods, educated minds stumbling into ruin, good citizens cheering for chains that contradict their own values. The problem is not a decline of intelligence, but a civilization that rewards flight from boredom, where shortcuts are prized over the long labor of thought, and noise is valued above silence. Yet within this diagnosis lies hope. For what is chosen can also be refused. If stupidity grows from our surrender to boredom, then strength lies in enduring it until it transforms. If structures exploit our restlessness, they can be broken and rebuilt. If the mind collapses under overwhelm, we can carve spaces where stillness is not terror, but soil for creation. Think of independent thought not as a skill, but as an ordeal. Like muscles tested by resistance, the mind is tested by boredom. At first, it feels unbearable. Silence, doubt, contradiction pressing down like weight, but only through such strain does it grow strong. No one would expect to run a marathon without enduring the pain of training, yet we expect to navigate the labyrinth of modern lies without ever suffering the desert of thought. A mind that flees boredom atrophies into dependence. A mind that endures it becomes sovereign. So when you feel the intoxication of certainty, when you dismiss what contradicts you without reflection, when you relish the comfort of already knowing, beware. This is how a functional reactive enters, not with a shout, but with a whisper. It tells you that you need not suffer the silence, that you can flee the desert, that you already possess all the answers. And in that moment of recognition, you stand before a choice. Will you surrender to the comfort of noise, fleeing into the false warmth of certainty? Or will you endure the desert of boredom, where independence is forged in silence and difficulty? The true test is commitment, whether we will keep thinking when thought grows inconvenient, when silence grows unbearable, when truth demands a price higher than illusion. To endure boredom without fleeing is not only the harder path, it is the path that keeps us human. In a world that fattens itself on our surrender to distraction, the act of thinking slowly and alone is already a rebellion. So here is the challenge. Take one belief you hold with certainty and spend 30 minutes in the desert of boredom, reading, listening, enduring the strongest voices against it. Not to torture yourself, nor to drown in endless doubt, but to practice the courage of silence, the strength of waiting, the discipline to think when it is easier not to. If your belief endures, it will no longer be borrowed opinion, but conviction tempered by trial. If it collapses, you will have won something greater, the freedom that comes from shedding illusion. Nietzsche would say, human dignity will not be preserved by intelligence, but by our capacity to endure the boredom that truth demands. And the future will belong not to the clever, but to those who refuse to flee the desert. If this reflection has unsettled a certainty you once clung to, do not mistake it for weakness. It is the first spark of courage, the willingness to endure the boredom of doubt rather than flee into the comfort of noise. Share this not with those who hunger for distraction, but with those unafraid to suffer thought, even when it wounds, even when it wearies. For in a world that profits from our flight from boredom, the simple act of thinking slowly, patiently, relentlessly becomes the purest form of resistance, and perhaps the last safeguard of our dignity.